I was just fined $800 for watering my plants for more than 10 minutes every morning. No, you didn't mishear. It wasn't for flooding the street. It wasn't for breaking a pipe. It was for watering vegetables in my own garden using collected rainwater at 6 a.m. And the person who signed that fine? None other than Karen Mathers, the president of my neighborhood HOA, who always wears a spotless white polo shirt and considers herself the queen of water conservation. Karen is the type of person who would measure your garden hose with a tape measure and file an official report to the HOA if it's too long. Last week, I had just attached the hose to my rain barrel when I saw Karen standing 15 feet away, phone in hand, recording video and yelling, "Water violation, I'm reporting this. You're wasting community resources." Wasting community resources? I was using rainwater, straight from the sky, no meter, no cost. My tomato plants don't need HOA approval to grow, do they? But to Karen, every drop you use is a threat to the uniform landscaping she controls with obsessive zeal. I tried to stay calm. I paid the fine. I even cut back to watering just 6 minutes a day, just to keep the peace. But you know what? After Karen fined me for wasting water, I started watching where her water was going. And that's when I discovered a secret pipe running from Karen's backyard straight into the lake. Don't take your eyes off this story, because what comes next will make you never look at an HOA the same way again. My name is Mark Halston. I'm a retired civil engineer who moved with my wife and 2 kids to the lakeside neighborhood of Willow Ridge. We bought this house for one simple reason. I wanted to grow vegetables. Not because I'm obsessed with farming, but because I like knowing exactly what goes on my family's plate. We installed a rainwater harvesting system. We planted organic vegetables. We used natural mulch, no artificial turf, no chemicals. And that was the first crime in the eyes of the HOA. And do you know who runs the HOA here? Karen Mathers. The woman who always wears a cream-colored maxi skirt, carries a purse with an HOA badge like she's with the FBI, and sees every crooked blade of grass as a threat to democracy. Karen hasn't lived here as long as I have. She moved in just a year ago. But within 3 months, she campaigned to replace the entire HOA board. And unsurprisingly, she won, running on the slogan, "Bringing sophistication back to Willow Ridge." Sophistication? She fined neighbors for having a truck parked for more than 4 hours, for planting wildflowers instead of peonies, and, the most ridiculous of all, for clotheslines that were visually disruptive from a distance. Then one day, Karen passed a new regulation. To protect water resources, each household may water their plants for a maximum of 10 minutes per day, not before 7 a.m., and must not use automatic sprinklers. Sounds reasonable at first, but wait. I use rainwater, not the shared water supply. I use a manual hose, nothing automatic. I water at 6 a.m. when it's cool to avoid evaporation. Yet within 1 week, I received 3 violation notices, totaling $800 in fines, along with a final warning from the HOA. My wife asked, "Are you doing something wrong? Maybe. You should stop watering for a few days." I stayed silent. I looked at the tiny garden we had nurtured for 6 months, the carrots, the kale, the tomatoes, slowly withering, not because of a water shortage, but because one woman believed the power of the HOA gave her the right to decide who gets to live green and who doesn't. But what Karen didn't know was that she picked the wrong guy to mess with. I'm not just a gardener. I understand the law, the land, and above all, the water. And from the moment I received that final fine, I started watching Karen. Every move, every hose, every sound in the night. Because sometimes the scariest things aren't in the rule book. They're hidden in the things we haven't seen yet. I thought I had gotten used to the absurdity, the ridiculous HOA violation notices, Karen's watchful eyes every morning as I stepped into my garden. But no, turns out I hadn't seen anything yet. That week, I decided to stop watering the plants. Not out of fear, but because I wanted to see. If I did nothing wrong, what would they make up next? Monday, 7 a.m., I was making coffee when my wife called me over. "Mark, you need to see this." She held out her phone, showing an email from the HOA. At 5:58 a.m. on Sunday, resident Mark Halston was observed watering plants outside the permitted time window. We recommend suspending water access for 72 hours. I scoffed. Watering at 5:58 a.m.? No way. I was still asleep. Then I paused. How did they know? Who recorded it? I stepped outside and looked up. A brand new camera had been installed on the utility pole at the corner, aimed directly at my garden. I don't remember agreeing to community surveillance cameras, I said. My wife was silent, then softly replied, Karen doesn't need agreement. She just gives orders. And then on Wednesday, Karen came to my house. Herself. No knocking. No heads up. She strode across the lawn like she was entering the rebel territory. I was watering a few mint pots with a handheld watering can. She stopped 3 meters away, arms crossed, face cold as stone. Mark, this is your last warning. If you continue watering before the designated time, the HOA has the right to shut off your water. I set the can down. I'm using rainwater. I haven't touched the shared water system. She narrowed her eyes. Rules are rules. Don't make us take stronger action. And then she turned and walked away, without waiting for another word. 2 days later, I found a warning posted on my mailbox. Unauthorized signage. Community landscape violation. I looked at the sign my daughter had painted. Garden of Hope. Green letters, a little broccoli doodle beside them. That sign was her pride, a gift she gave me after her first school lesson on sustainable gardening. And now, it was labeled a $200 violation. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch. The air was calm, the breeze was cool, but I wasn't. I saw a white SUV drive by slowly. Its headlights scanned my house like a security system. I couldn't see clearly, but I knew it was Karen. And I began to wonder, is this still a neighborhood? Or is it a kingdom where Karen is queen, and I'm the peasant being exiled for watering too early? I used to think I was just a regular resident. But now I felt like public enemy number one. I didn't use public water. I didn't break any real rule. All I wanted was to keep our little garden alive, the place where my daughter learned to plant her first seeds. And yet, I was being watched, fined, isolated. Then I looked across the fence. Karen's house. Her backyard was always barren. No garden, no plants, nothing. Just a wide concrete patio and one oddly long water pipe pointing toward the lake. I'm not sure I intended to investigate at first, but a strange feeling tugged at me. If she cares so much about how I use water, could it be she's hiding something about how she gets rid of hers? I didn't know the answer, but I was about to find out. Because if Karen wanted to paint me as the villain for a few drops of water, then it was time I found out where her water was going and whether it was as clean as she preached. Sometimes, you don't need to be a detective. You just need to ask yourself the right question. Mine was this: why would someone obsessed with saving water need a 40-foot-long pipe running from her backyard to the lake? The next morning, as the sun was rising, I made coffee and brought a chair out to the porch. I didn't drink it. I just watched. Karen's house was always sealed tight, but from the corner of my yard, I could see a portion of her backyard, a flat concrete surface with nothing on it. No potted plants, no hoses, no gutters, just a silver-gray pipe running along the wall toward the lake. At first, I thought it might be a rainwater drain, but no, it was too large, too new, and it made a faint humming sound every night after 10 p.m. when the entire neighborhood was asleep. I told my wife. She frowned. You think she's channeling rainwater into the lake? I shook my head. If it's rainwater, why would she need a pump, and why only at night? I needed more proof. I called an old friend, Kyle, a guy I studied environmental engineering with in college. He now works as a water testing technician for the state. Can you help me analyze a water sample? Not for free, but if you offer beer and toast, we can talk. We laughed. Set a date for the weekend, Saturday night. While the neighborhood was inside watching football, Kyle and I dressed in dark clothes, headlamps on, and followed the lakeside path until we reached the rear of Karen's property. We didn't trespass. We stayed exactly on the edge of the shoreline, and from there, we saw it clearly. The discharge pipe was sticking straight into the water, subtle but not invisible. Kyle carefully collected a sample using a sterile lab siphon. We recorded the time, temperature, and GPS coordinates. Then we slipped away, like two hunters in a nature documentary. 2 days later, Kyle called. I'd never heard his voice so serious. Mark, what you're dealing with is no small matter. The water sample showed nitrate and phosphate levels 4 times above normal. There are traces of detergents, dishwashing agents, and even signs of industrial-grade fertilizer. I was stunned. You're saying she's dumping wastewater into the lake? Not just domestic, possibly from a mini car wash system or something similar, but clearly untreated. And that's illegal? Kyle gave a dry laugh. Mark, that's a violation of state-level environmental law. If investigated, the fines could hit tens of thousands of dollars. And if the lake is a backup drinking water source, she could face criminal charges. I stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, head spinning. Karen. The woman who slapped me with a violation for watering more than 10 minutes. Karen. The one who punished my daughter for painting a sign that said Garden of Hope. Karen was secretly dumping pollutants into the lake, the same lake where kids swim, where people fish, where residents believe they live in a green, clean, upscale community. I looked out the window into our garden. The breeze stirred the kale leaves gently, and I remembered something my daughter asked me last week. Daddy, what do we do if we're doing the right thing, but still get punished? I didn't know how to answer then, but now I do. You don't fight a hypocrite with anger. You fight them with truth, with evidence, and with the law. That night, I began compiling everything I had: the water sample, video footage of the discharge pipe, GPS data, a discharge schedule that matched the pump's humming, an underground connection map, and a copy of the complaint I filed with the Department of Environmental Protection. I don't know how Karen will respond, but I know one thing. She may control the HOA, but she doesn't control the water. And this time, the water will speak for itself. I submitted the complaint on Sunday night. By 9 a.m. Monday, I received a confirmation email from the Utah Department of Environmental Protection. Short and to the point, classic bureaucratic language. Your complaint has been received. A team of inspectors will survey the reported site within the next 48 hours. I thought I'd have to wait longer, but I didn't. Wednesday morning, while I was spreading rice husks in the garden, 2 unmarked white SUVs pulled up in front of Karen's house. 4 people in Navy uniforms stepped out, holding clipboards, toolkits, and what looked like a geologic scanner. They didn't ring the doorbell. They walked straight to the backyard. By the book. I stood silently behind my fence. From a distance, I saw Karen step out in her usual crisp white blouse. But this time, the confidence was gone. One of the inspectors held up a search warrant. Karen tried to smile. She pointed toward the yard and started rambling. I don't know where that pipe came from. It might be left over from the previous owner. I've never used it. If there's a mistake, it must be the plumber's fault. I care deeply about the environment. I was the first to propose water restrictions in this community. But the inspectors didn't respond. One opened a concrete lid. Another measured flow rates. The remaining 2 took water samples from the pipe buried under the turf. Karen stepped back, visibly pale. 10 minutes later, one of the inspectors spoke, loud enough for me to hear from across the fence. We've identified untreated wastewater discharge into a public lake. This is a serious violation under Article 3, Section 17 of the Utah Water Resource Protection Code. Karen stammered. No way. I just have a washing machine hooked up. I didn't know. The inspector didn't reply. They simply filed their report, signed it, and placed an envelope on the patio table. Cease and desist order for all discharge operations. This property will be monitored during the investigation. That night, the community meeting started at 7 p.m., but within 15 minutes, it turned into an unofficial tribunal. Karen arrived early. Same white dress, hair in a tight bun. But her eyes no longer blinked with their usual snap. I arrived 5 minutes late, and I brought a small USB stick. It contained a video of the discharge pipe, the water sample results, Karen's pump purchase receipt from 3 months ago, and satellite images from Google Earth showing the lake's color changes in sync with her discharge schedule. I didn't need to say much. I simply said, Karen fined me for watering my garden for 10 minutes. But she dumped wastewater into the lake, the same lake our children swim in every summer. The room fell silent. An elderly neighbor began to cry. A father covered his child's ears at the mention of toxic nitrates. Karen stood up, tried to snatch the microphone. This is a conspiracy, a smear campaign. Mark hates me because I enforce order. Don't believe him. He's the one wasting the community's water with his gardening. I looked her straight in the eyes. I use rainwater. You dump detergents into the lake. We're not the same, Karen. And then Jenny, 72 years old, resident since 1983, who once arranged flowers for Karen at every fair, stood up. I used to think you cared about the community. Turns out you only care about your image. I motioned to remove Karen Mathers as HOA president, effective immediately. No one objected. Karen walked out, trailed by whispers and steel-cold stares. She thought she was the law. Until the law came knocking. And this time, it didn't knock politely. That night, I went down to the lake. The water was clearer. The faint chemical smell was gone. The moon shimmered across each tiny ripple. I brought my daughter with me. She held up the wooden sign, Garden of Hope, and I planted it back into the soil. No one would have the right to pull it out again. You think that's the end of the story? Think again. Karen doesn't back down that easily. In the next part, I'll tell you how she tried to flip the narrative, hired lawyers, called the press, and attempted to paint me as the villain. But this time, I was more ready than ever. I thought it was over after the community meeting. Karen had been removed, the community had spoken, and the cease and desist order from the Department of Environmental Protection was as clear as day. But I had underestimated one thing. Karen never backs down. Not ever. A week later, I turned on the TV during dinner and saw a familiar face on the local news channel. HOA president wrongfully accused by defiant neighbor, a two-sided story in Willow Ridge. The anchor spoke with that deep, skeptical tone. On screen, Karen sat on a white sofa, wearing a beige sweater, holding a cup of tea like she was posing for a lifestyle magazine. She pursed her lips and said, "I was only trying to protect the community. Now I'm the victim of an organized smear campaign. People call me a Karen just because I tried to keep order." Cut to footage of my backyard, a clip of me watering plants. The reporter added commentary. Neighbor Mark Halston claims he only used rainwater, but HOA records show multiple violations of water-saving policies. I set my chopsticks down. My wife looked at me. "They're turning you into the villain." I nodded, swallowing my anger like an ice cube down my throat. 2 days later, I received a letter from a law firm, Blackstone and Pierce, a private practice known for representing big real estate entities. It read, "Cease defamation, retract the complaint, and issue a public apology to Mrs. Karen Mathers. Failure to comply will result in a civil lawsuit for reputational and emotional damages." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I knew I was about to win again. I called Patricia Gomez, a state-level environmental attorney and an old colleague from my engineering days. I only had to say one sentence. "Karen is threatening a countersuit." There was a pause. Then Patricia chuckled. "Perfect. Now we can open everything." "Mark, if she wants to take this to court, we'll turn that courtroom into a spotlight for all the evidence she's tried to bury." We launched a coordinated counterattack. Filed a request for full disclosure of HOA financials from the past 3 years. Discovered Karen had authorized 4 maintenance contracts worth over $80,000, all with a company owned by her brother-in-law. Submitted a motion to suspend all legal threats on the grounds of a strategic lawsuit against public participation, also known as a SLAP. Patricia personally filed the motion with the district court. And then the media firestorm hit. But this time, it was aimed at Karen. The news outlet that had once interviewed her received the investigation file from the environmental department and could no longer ignore it. A new segment aired, "Former HOA president under investigation for illegal dumping and financial irregularities. What was once labeled defamation is now evidence." Karen went silent. No more press, no more threats, no more posturing, just silence. A month later, I was invited to speak at the statewide HOA residents conference. The topic? Abuse of power in homeowners associations. I told the whole story, from the Garden of Hope sign to the final legal takedown. The crowd applauded. An elderly man came up and shook my hand. I went through the same thing, but I never knew how to fight back. I smiled and spoke honestly. All it takes is knowing the law and not being afraid to use it. Karen used the media to twist the truth. I used the law to expose it. And the truth always wins, if you don't back down. That night, I took a walk by the lake. The water was clean again. Laughter echoed as kids played under the orange sunset. I was no longer the guy who watered too early. I was the one who defended a lake, a community, and something everyone deserves: justice. Think that was the end? Not quite. Wait for the final chapter, where I'll tell you what Karen did after everything. and the shocking conclusion in court where she tried one last counterattack. But this time, I wasn't alone. This time, the entire community stood behind me. 3 months after that fateful community meeting, I thought the story had come to an end. Karen had gone quiet. The media moved on to newer scandals. The lake had never been cleaner. I returned to my garden, to peaceful days, and thought maybe this is finally over. I was wrong. One September morning, I received a notice from the district court. Defendant Mark Halston is hereby summoned to testify in a civil trial initiated by plaintiff Karen Mathers. Karen was still suing. And this time, she wasn't just suing me. She was suing the new HOA board, the Department of Environmental Protection, and even the news station that aired the investigative segment. Her claim? A conspiracy to destroy her reputation, cause emotional distress, and sabotage her career opportunities. I read the complaint and thought I was watching a legal comedy show. But I couldn't laugh for long. Karen had hired a major law firm from Salt Lake City, and she was demanding $2.5 million in damages. My wife squeezed my hand when we got the news. "You're not going through this alone anymore," she said, and she was right. On the day of the trial, I arrived early, not to prepare for battle, but to welcome a long line of supporters, former HOA members, environmental engineers, TV journalists, neighbors, and Kyle, my friend who collected the water sample. He came with his lab notes and equipment in tow. In court, Karen's attorney delivered a dramatic monologue. My client suffered deep emotional harm from the spread of misinformation, leading to depression, loss of income, displacement, and social exile. Then it was my turn. I stood, and one by one I presented the videos, the receipts, the Department of Environmental Protection's reports, the lab analysis, the HOA bylaws. Karen herself had signed and broken. The judge turned to Karen and asked, "Miss Mathers, can you dispute any of the factual evidence Mr. Halston has presented?" Karen said nothing. She just stared downward and cried. But tears couldn't save her now. The ruling, case dismissed entirely, plaintiff to cover all legal costs, recommendation to refer the case to the district attorney for review of perjury and malicious prosecution. Karen exited through the back of the courthouse. No cameras, no press, just a shadow, quietly retreating. And me? I didn't celebrate. I went home, rolled up my sleeves, and dug a hole to plant my first orange tree in the corner of the garden, where my daughter had placed that little wooden sign, Garden of Hope. What's the lesson here? Karen believed the law was something she could wield against others. She forgot that real law exists to protect people, not control them. She used power to intimidate, defame, manipulate. But I used knowledge, patience, and community to fight back. And in the end, justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be heard. Have you ever dealt with a Karen in your HOA, your workplace, or even your local government? Don't stay silent. Document everything. Learn the law. Find your people. Because sometimes just one drop of water is enough to crack open a rotten system. And if you want to hear about the 78-year-old farmer who was forced to sell his land to build a highway and how he fought back using ancient mineral rights, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss that story. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. And remember, even a tiny garden can become a battlefield for justice if you're willing to stand your ground.